Eloise Gardner's breakfast arrived precisely as the Airbus A380 reached cruising altitude, the delicate scent of saffron and truffle wafting from the perfectly plated eggs Benedict. Her piece lasted exactly 8 minutes. "Excuse me," the voice cut through the hushed ambiance of the first-class cabin like a shard of ice. "I believe there's been some mistake." Eloise looked up to find a flight attendant hovering beside her seat, blonde hair pulled into a tight bun, lips pressed into what might generously be called a smile, but more accurately resembled a grimace. The name tag pinned to her impeccably pressed uniform read, "Danielle Calloway." "I'm sorry?" Eloise responded, setting down her magazine. Danielle's gaze swept over Eloise's simple linen dress, her natural hair styled in a neat twist, before lingering pointedly on her dark brown skin. "This is the first-class cabin," she explained with exaggerated patience, as if speaking to a confused child. "Economy is toward the rear of the aircraft." Around them, several passengers glanced up, their expressions ranging from uncomfortable to openly curious. A middle-aged white businessman across the aisle lowered his Financial Times just enough to observe the interaction. "I'm aware of the aircraft's configuration," Eloise replied evenly. "I'm in the correct seat. 1A. Danielle's artificial smile didn't waver. "May I see your boarding pass, please?" Though the request was standard, something in Danielle's tone, the certainty that she would find a discrepancy, made it clear this wasn't routine verification. Eloise reached into her handbag and produced her boarding pass, which Danielle snatched rather than took. The flight attendant murmured, making a show of examining the document. "This does say 1A, but there must be some mix-up. These premium seats are quite expensive." The implication hung in the air, unmistakable in its meaning. Several passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while others watched with undisguised interest. "The ticket was purchased correctly," Eloise stated, her calm demeanor belying the familiar weight settling in her chest, the leaden recognition of yet another person looking at her and seeing only her skin, not her humanity. "If you check your passenger manifest, you'll find I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." Danielle's eyes narrowed slightly. "Our first-class passengers typically book well in advance. We have many regulars who've been loyal to Transatlantic Airways for years." "I'm sure you do," Eloise agreed pleasantly. "Now, may I have my boarding pass back?" Instead of returning the document, Danielle tucked it into her pocket. "I'll need to verify this with my supervisor. We've had incidents of unauthorized upgrades in the past. People trying to sneak into seats they haven't paid for." A flush of heat crept up Eloise's neck, but her expression remained neutral, a skill honed through countless similar encounters. "I assure you I've paid for this seat. Perhaps you should check your manifest before making accusations." "I'm not making accusations," Danielle replied, her voice rising slightly. "I'm simply doing my job. These premium cabins have standards, and I'm responsible for maintaining them." By now, the first-class cabin had fallen silent, the usual white noise of quiet conversations replaced by the tense anticipation of unfolding drama. Even the flight attendants preparing drinks in the galley had paused to watch. "What standards exactly?" Eloise asked, her voice dangerously soft. "The standard that assumes a black woman couldn't possibly afford a first-class ticket without some kind of mistake or deception." Danielle's professional veneer cracked slightly, color rising in her cheeks. "This has nothing to do with race," she hissed, low enough that only those in immediate proximity could hear. "But since you brought it up, we both know these tickets cost more than most people from your neighborhood see in a month. Now, I suggest you gather your things and move to your actual seat before this becomes an issue." "It already is an issue," said the businessman across the aisle, setting down his newspaper entirely. "I've been watching this interaction, and I'm disturbed by what I'm hearing." Danielle flashed him a practiced smile. "Sir, I appreciate your concern, but this is a standard verification procedure." "No, it isn't," interrupted another flight attendant, a younger woman who had approached from the galley. "Danielle, what are you doing? We don't challenge passengers like this without cause." "There is cause, Rebecca," Danielle snapped. "Look at her. She doesn't belong here." The cabin went silent at the naked prejudice in the statement. Eloise sat perfectly still, her posture upright, her expression a masterclass in dignified restraint. "I would like to speak with the purser," she said quietly, "and I would like my boarding pass returned to me immediately." "Listen, honey," Danielle replied, abandoning all pretense of professionalism. "You can play this game if you want, but I've been flying this route for 15 years. I know our regular passengers, and I know when something's not right. You've got two choices. Move back to economy willingly, or I'll have security waiting when we land in London." Rebecca, the younger flight attendant, looked horrified. "Danielle, stop! This isn't—" "No, you stop!" Danielle cut her off. "I'm senior cabin crew on this flight. I've watched people like her trying to game the system for years, playing the race card when they get caught. Well, not on my watch." Eloise remained seated, her calm demeanor a stark contrast to Danielle's escalating hostility. "My boarding pass, please." "Fine," Danielle conceded, pulling the document from her pocket and practically throwing it onto Eloise's breakfast tray, sending droplets of hollandaise sauce splattering across the fine white tablecloth. "But this isn't over. I'll be checking with ground operations about your ticket." As Danielle turned to leave, Eloise reached for her napkin to clean the sauce from her boarding pass. The simple movement seemed to trigger something in Danielle, who whirled back around. "Don't give me that condescending look," she snapped, though Eloise's expression had remained neutral throughout. "You people always think you're so superior when you manage to infiltrate spaces like this. You've pulled one over on everyone." The cabin was now deadly silent, passengers watching in stunned disbelief as the scene unfolded. Rebecca had backed away slightly, apparently unsure how to defuse the situation. "I think you should take a moment to compose yourself," Eloise suggested quietly. "You're creating a scene that's uncomfortable for everyone." Something in Danielle snapped at the calm suggestion. Before anyone could react, she reached out and slapped Eloise across the face, the crack of palm against cheek echoing through the silent cabin like a gunshot. "How dare you tell me how to do my job?" she hissed, trembling with rage. For a moment nobody moved. Then, as if a spell had broken, chaos erupted. Rebecca lunged forward, pulling Danielle back. The businessman across the aisle rose to his feet, his expression thunderous. Several passengers began shouting, some reaching for their phones to record the incident. Eloise touched her cheek, where an angry red mark was forming, her expression still remarkably composed despite the assault. Without speaking, she reached for her phone. "Oh, now you're calling your homies to complain?" Danielle sneered, struggling against Rebecca's restraining grip. "Go ahead. Tell them all about the mean white lady who wouldn't let you play princess in first class." Eloise didn't respond to the provocation, simply typing a brief message before setting her phone aside. Her dignity in the face of such blatant abuse made Danielle's behavior seem all the more grotesque by contrast. 3 minutes later, the aircraft's intercom system crackled to life. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is Charles Gardner, CEO of Transatlantic Airways, speaking to you from the flight deck. I apologize for this unusual communication, but I've just been informed of a disturbing incident in our first-class cabin involving a member of our cabin crew and my wife, Eloise Gardner." The color drained from Danielle's face as the implications of the announcement registered. Her eyes darted to Eloise, who met her gaze steadily, without triumph or malice, just the weary recognition of a pattern repeated once too often. "Due to the seriousness of this situation," Charles continued, his voice controlled but tight with barely suppressed fury, "we will be making an unscheduled landing in Shannon, Ireland, where the crew member in question will be removed from service. I extend my personal apologies to all passengers for this disruption to your journey." As the announcement concluded, Danielle seemed to physically shrink, her previous bravado evaporating as the reality of her situation became clear. Not only had she harassed and physically assaulted a passenger, a criminal offense in itself, but that passenger was the wife of the airline's owner. "Mrs. Gardner," she began, her voice now trembling, "I had no idea. Please, this is a misunderstanding. If I'd known who you were—" "That's precisely the problem," Eloise interrupted, her voice quiet but clear enough for everyone in the hushed cabin to hear. "You shouldn't need to know who I am to treat me with basic human dignity. The fact that you would treat any passenger this way based on the color of their skin is the issue, not that you happen to choose the wrong target for your bigotry." The cabin remained silent as the aircraft began its descent toward Shannon Airport. Danielle was escorted to the rear galley by two other flight attendants, where she remained out of sight for the remainder of the flight. As the plane touched down, two airport security officers and a stern-looking woman in a Transatlantic Airways executive uniform were visible waiting on the tarmac. When the aircraft doors opened, Charles Gardner himself appeared from the flight deck, tall, distinguished, and radiating cold fury. He bypassed the waiting officials and came directly to Eloise, kneeling beside her seat. "Are you all right?" he asked softly, examining the reddened mark on her cheek. "I'm fine," she assured him, squeezing his hand. "This isn't my first encounter with prejudice, as you well know." Charles nodded grimly before rising to his full height and turning toward the galley where Danielle was being kept. "Bring her out," he ordered. "Mr. Gardner," she began, her voice breaking, "please let me explain—" "There's nothing to explain, Ms. Calloway," Charles cut her off, his voice glacial. "Your actions were witnessed by an entire cabin of passengers and recorded on multiple devices. You physically assaulted my wife after subjecting her to racist abuse. Your employment with Transatlantic Airways is terminated, effective immediately." "Please," Danielle pleaded, desperation evident in her voice. "I have a mortgage, bills. It was just a misunderstanding. 15 years of perfect service can't be erased by one mistake." "This wasn't a mistake," Charles replied evenly. "It was a revelation of character. And it wasn't one incident. It was a series of deliberate choices, each one more inexcusable than the last." He turned to the waiting security officers. "Ms. Calloway is to be escorted from the premises immediately. Her credentials have been deactivated, and she is banned from all transatlantic properties and flights. The company will be pressing charges for assault." As Danielle was led away, still protesting and pleading, Charles addressed the remaining passengers. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize again for this disruption. We will be resuming our journey to London shortly with a replacement crew. As compensation for the delay, all passengers will receive travel vouchers for future flights, and our premium cabin passengers will have their current tickets fully refunded." He paused, surveying the cabin. Transatlantic Airways was founded on the principle that luxury travel should be accessible to everyone who chooses to purchase it. Today, we failed to uphold that principle. For that, I am deeply sorry. I assure you that this incident will lead to a comprehensive review of our training and corporate culture. As Charles returned to the flight deck to oversee the crew change, Eloise closed her eyes briefly, the adrenaline of the confrontation finally giving way to fatigue. When she opened them, she found the businessman from across the aisle standing beside her seat. "Mrs. Gardner," he said quietly, "I want to apologize for not speaking up sooner. I watched that situation developing and hesitated too long before saying anything." Eloise offered a small smile. "You did speak up eventually. That's more than most people do." "It shouldn't be exceptional to stand against obvious bigotry," he replied, looking genuinely troubled. "I'm sorry you experienced that, especially in a space where you should have been able to relax and enjoy your journey." She'd built her identity around her job, her status, her perceived superiority. Now, with all of that stripped away in an instant, she was forced to confront the ugly truth that had been revealed in that first-class cabin. Her success had been built not on merit, but on a carefully constructed hierarchy that placed people like her above people like Eloise. A hierarchy she'd defended so viciously that she'd destroyed herself in the process. As the Transatlantic Airways plane resumed its journey to London, Eloise opened her laptop to review notes for her upcoming presentation at the Global Education Conference she was attending, her actual reason for traveling. As the founder of a foundation providing STEM education to underserved communities, she was used to being underestimated, dismissed, or mistaken for staff rather than leadership. What had happened with Danielle was nothing new. The only difference was the very public consequence, a rarity in a world where such everyday indignities typically went unpunished. "More tea, Mrs. Gardner?" asked Rebecca, the young flight attendant who had attempted to intervene earlier. "Yes, thank you," Eloise replied with a genuine smile. "And please, call me Eloise." As Rebecca poured the tea, she hesitated. "I just want to say, what Danielle did was inexcusable. But it's not representative of all of us at Transatlantic." "I know that," Eloise assured her. "But it's representative of something much larger than one flight attendant or one airline. It's about who gets the benefit of the doubt in this world and who doesn't." Rebecca nodded thoughtfully. "For what it's worth, your husband's announcement about a comprehensive review isn't just talk. There's already an email to all staff about mandatory training and policy changes." "That's a start," Eloise acknowledged. "But real change doesn't come from policy manuals or sensitivity training. It comes from people like you, speaking up in the moment when you see something wrong, even when it's uncomfortable or risky." She'd become the cautionary tale, the example, the case study in consequences. The irony wasn't lost on her. She who had been so concerned with maintaining standards had now become the standard-bearer for what happened when bigotry outweighed professionalism, when prejudice trumped basic human decency. Charles returned briefly from the flight deck, stopping to check on Eloise before continuing his rounds through the cabin, personally apologizing to passengers for the disruption. His hand lingered on her shoulder, a small gesture of support that spoke volumes about their partnership. "You don't have to do this," she told him quietly. "The situation's been handled." "I'm not doing it for them," he replied, equally soft. "I'm doing it because I need to see for myself that you're truly all right. And because I need these passengers to understand that what happened today isn't acceptable on my airline or anywhere else." But that same marriage, that same position, meant she would forever be questioned. Was she on this flight because she'd earned her place, or because of who she'd married? Had she founded her foundation with her own expertise, or was it her husband's connections that made it successful? The unspoken assumptions followed her everywhere, articulated today by Danielle, but present in countless subtle ways in her daily interactions. "Access is not the same as belonging," she told them, her voice carrying clearly through the conference hall. "You can open the door, but if everyone inside immediately questions your right to be there, you haven't created inclusion. You've simply relocated the exclusion to a more prestigious address." It shouldn't require being married to the CEO. It shouldn't require viral videos and public humiliation. It shouldn't require an incident at all. But sometimes, breaking through entrenched systems of exclusion meant using whatever leverage became available, even when that leverage came from surprising sources.